Welcome back to Proxamer, everybody, and today we're going to be doing a Craftworld Eldar Advanced Tactics video on what I like to call the Horrify / Embolden trap. So this is actually a subscriber-inspired video. It's one of my subscribers, Joshua Shaffer, sent me basically an idea about how to utilize Horrify and Embolden in games against combat-oriented enemy units. And I have to admit, I didn't really see this before he mentioned it. So I wanted to share it with you guys because even in really highly competitive circles, I don't see this being used much, but I think it actually has a lot of potential against certain matchups. So I want to go ahead and go into it with you, what it is and how to use it. So just a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at in this video. We're going to be taking a look at the Embolden and Horrify psychic power in the Runes of Battle, explaining what they do so you have kind of a general idea of how they work. We're going to be looking at what you need for the trap to take place, and we're going to be looking at how the trap works and what units it works well on. And in addition, I'm going to be sharing a few diagrams with you to illustrate how it would look on the tabletop. So, Embolden and Horrify. So this is not something that a lot of players take in their games, but Embolden essentially allows your unit to strike first in combat. So this has rather limited applications because even if, for example, you're getting charged yourself, if your unit has Embolden, then that just means you're at equal priority with the enemy unit. So let's say an enemy unit charges you, you have the Embolden, you're going to be at equal priority instead of having first priority. So it's not quite like it was back in the day where always strike first meant always strike first no matter what. In this case, it's just going to give you equal priority. So Embolden isn't really used as much. However, Horrify is a little bit different. Horrify forces an enemy unit to strike last, which is a great way to deal with assault units that wish to charge your combat-oriented units. So basically, they have to take massive damage or trade down in order to get a charge off. And most close combat units are just not going to be willing to charge your Banshees if they're under the effects of Horrify. So this is where the Horrify trap comes in. So, what do you need for the trap to actually work? So you do need a Warlock with the Embolden and Horrify psychic power, or a unit of at least 4 Warlocks for the Battle Psyker's stratagem, which basically allows you to cast both sides of the Horrify psychic power, so you can also cast Embolden. In some cases, it could help you. And you also need a strong melee unit, something like Howling Banshees, Striking Scorpions, Shining Spears, etc. You don't want to be casting Horrify on a unit if the unit is going to be charging something like Dire Avengers, because Dire Avengers are not going to hit that hard. So even if Dire Avengers strike first after getting charged, they're just not going to do enough damage to still win combat. So it's definitely something you want to reserve for a more powerful close combat unit. Now, this is an optional thing you could do if you have a unit of at least 4 Warlocks. You could use the Battle Psyker's stratagem, which basically allows you to cast both sides of the effect, Horrify and Embolden. So although this is not usually needed, a Warlock unit can cast both sides of it to ensure the enemy strikes last. For example, if the enemy has an ability to force you to strike last or first as well, so for example, that enemy has a strikes first ability, this can be used to give you priority in those situations. So it's a very niche kind of thing you can use to ensure that you can strike first in some situations where an enemy might also have the strike first special rule, but in most cases it's just not going to be needed. You'll mostly just need to use the Horrify psychic power. And a quick rundown of the always strikes first or last special rules. So basically what this boils down to in the core rules is strikes first and strikes last rules that are applied to a unit cancel each other out. So let's say that a unit of, Seekers or something like that, something from Slaanesh, has the always strike first special rule. If you cast Horrify on that unit, then the always strikes first and always strikes last will cancel out. So essentially what this means is they're not going to get either ability, the strikes first or strikes last effect. Also, always strikes last essentially counters the counter-offensive stratagem, and it basically cannot be used if the target is under the effects of a fight's last effect, because the unit would be ineligible to be targeted with this stratagem. So it's a very useful way of also getting around the counteroffensive stratagem. Okay, so here's how the trap works, and here are the units it works well on. So basically the trap works by casting Horrify on an enemy combat unit that is going to assault one of your combat units. So for example, let's say your Howling Banshees just charged in and wiped out a unit of, I don't know, Slaaneshi demons or Bloodletters or something like that. However, your enemy has another unit that's ready to basically charge in and kill your Banshees. Casting Horrify on that unit will force it to strike last even if it charged that turn. So this is a great tool to essentially paralyze an enemy assault unit for your own combat unit to charge next turn. So basically your enemy has two choices. Charge in, well, really three choices, but one of them they're probably never going to pick. So the first choice is they charge in anyway and take a bunch of damage. They're probably never going to pick this option, to be honest. The second thing they can do is basically just stay there and do nothing. That's the second option. The third option is they can try to get away from that Banshee unit because they know that Banshee unit's going to charge, but guess what? Honestly, the Banshees have such a good charge range that unless they're Slaanesh, they're probably never going to do this either. So unless it's a unit of Seekers, Seekers will be able to get away from Banshees, most likely, but even so, the Banshees still have a chance of catching them with the Strands of Fate dice. That's how fast Banshees are. So again, your opponent really has no good choices here, and essentially this is going to paralyze the enemy unit and make that unit very cost inefficient for the next turn and probably sign its death warrant. So here's an example of a unit of Howling Banshees in red that just finished killing a unit of Space Marines in blue, right? And our opponent has cleverly placed a combat unit behind the ruin to counter the Banshees in their next turn. However, if we cast Horrify on that unit behind the ruin, your opponent decides to charge the Banshees, they will strike last. This is going to effectively deny your opponent a way of dealing with them in close combat. So if those were Assault Marines, the most they would be able to do is fire their pistols. And again, against Banshees, firing pistols is not going to kill the unit, especially at a -1 to hit. Banshees will most likely survive that. And Banshees do kill Assault Marines very well. So that Assault Marine unit is not going to be alive the next turn. And again, your opponent probably just doesn't want to do nothing about it and leave the Banshees alive or charge them, because that would just give the Banshees a greater movement ability. So if the Assault Marines charged in, the Banshees would strike first, they would kill the Assault Marines, and then they would just consolidate, and that would just give them basically free movement. So your opponent has no good way of dealing with this type of situation, especially if you're out of line of sight of their other elements of the army, or your opponent doesn't have any shooting in the area which can deal with the Banshees. So again, this is a very good trap to use on a unit that's just basically used as a counter assault unit, what it's called. So oftentimes opponents will take units called counter assault units that they have in transports, or maybe they just have them hidden behind certain key pieces of terrain, so that if you jump in on one of their objectives and kill the units on their objective marker, they can swing in with a counteroffensive and kill your unit in return. But if you have Horrify, they're not going to be able to do this. So again, they could try to do it, but they're probably going to just die to the Howling Banshees if they get a charge off. So in that last example, we used Horrify in a very defensive way to prevent units from charging into the Banshees. But you can also use it in an offensive way if you have multiple units that are assaulting that turn. So Horrify also prevents the counteroffensive stratagem in cases where you have multiple units charging in. So in this case, the unit charged by the Howling Banshees on the right-hand side behind the ruin is going to strike last anyway because of the Banshee's effect. But one of the other two units on the left side in the forest will be subject to counteroffensive. So we have Striking Scorpions and a unit of Warlocks there. To negate this, hit one of the enemy units in the forest with Horrify so that it will also fight last. So ideally you would hit the unit that is fighting the Warlocks with Horrify so that it strikes last. And then this will leave your Striking Scorpions in a position to eliminate the only eligible counteroffensive unit first. So you're going to eliminate that unit of Marines on the left in the forest, or whatever unit that is, with the striking scorpions, and then your warlocks at that point will be in a position to attack first in the normal, because they charged in, they're going to get priority there, and they're going to be able to wipe out that unit on the right, or at least close to. Sometimes warlocks are unable to kill certain units fully, but they're pretty tanky. And the good news about this is if your opponent decides to stay in with the warlocks, they're going to be locked in combat, so they'll be, they won't be able to be a target for shooting and stuff like that. So in this case, we used Horrify in a very offensive way to guarantee that all of our units were going to be able to strike first, regardless of the enemy's ability to use the counteroffensive stratagem, which again is something newer players don't often think about, but something you have to watch out for if you have multiple close combat units that are charging in the same turn. Because a savvy enemy will indeed use this to kill your unit before their unit is killed themselves. And because Craftworld Eldar tend to be a little bit squishier than other combat units, it's generally not a good idea to allow your opponent to use this stratagem if you can help it. So in conclusion, Horrify and Embolden is not a common pick as far as the runes of battle go, but it can definitely trap your opponent's combat unit in a bad spot where it really can't charge your unit without dying. And I can't state how important that is, especially against an enemy army that's purely based on combat. I'm thinking things like Chaos Demons. I'm thinking things like, for the Sisters of Battle, the Sisters Repentia, for example. This would be a great use of the power on, right? So units like this that don't have shooting attacks, it really just absolutely paralyzes them and makes them almost unable to do anything in their next turn. And furthermore, it can also be used offensively when supporting multiple charges to prevent the counteroffensive stratagem from being used. So although I don't think a lot of competitive players take this power very seriously, Horrify and Embolden that is, I think it has a really big place, especially potentially in the Chaos Demon matchup and some of the higher end matchups that you'll see in competitive play against things like Sisters Repentia or Terminators and stuff like that. And again, even though Terminators have a shooting weapon, even if they shoot at those Howling Banshees, there's a good chance that maybe one of those Howling Banshees will live to tell the tale, and then that Howling Banshee Exarch can do a lot of damage by herself, right? Or, to be honest with you, even if they do kill the unit, that's preventing some potential movement from those Terminators. So it's preventing A, a charge, and B, a consolidation. So in both of those cases, the Horrify ability, Psychic Power, is very useful for limiting your opponent's options. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. And I know it's been kind of a quick video today, but I just wanted to kind of show you how this works because it is actually very underrated and it can be very powerful. And take, for example, those of you who are using a Falcon to deep strike a unit of Howling Banshees into combat. Just think of running a single Warlock with the Embolden Horrify Psychic Power and casting that on a nearby combat unit that you maybe can't reach with the Howling Banshees. So those Howling Banshees would charge into a unit, and then after they're done consolidating, that enemy assault unit that was, specifically there to counter your Banshees or whatever combat units you were going to deep strike in that area, now basically can't do anything without dying. So definitely can charge the Banshees, and if the Banshees live, the Banshees can charge and kill another unit in the next turn. So pretty good ability, honestly. It can really help your Banshees or other units be able to kill more than one unit after their first round of combat, right? Because that's usually what happens with combat units like Banshees. They usually charge in, kill something big, and then they get shot up or killed, right, by assaults, things like that. Because remember, Banshees only apply the strikes last when they charge. When they get charged, they don't apply it. All right, so that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Be sure to, leave a comment in the comment section if you have something to add to this video. And once again, a special thanks to my subscriber, Joshua Shaffer, for showing me this. Really appreciate it. It's actually caught a lot of my opponents off guard in recent games. So it's really a very useful psychic power. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Peace out, everybody. I'll see you guys later. Have a good one, everybody.